Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and prop preview for Thursday night football between the Jets and the Patriots. Gonna get you guys ready for all of your exposure Thursday with first off a breakdown of the Draftkings side and what we're doing for our single game lineups. That'll include an injury report, some of the pieces of leverage that you can find across the slate. We'll talk ownership, lineup construction in general, where you guys can find some differentiation to what the rest of the field is doing. And then afterwards, we're gonna focus on the prop and the betting side of things with a couple props that have already entered on Underdog. You guys might want to consider tailing for yourself. So by the end, you'll have a complete game plan for all of your exposure. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get this thing going. Before going player by player, let's mention the spread that we have for Thursday, which is going to be 12.5 points favoring the Pats side, which is not only going to lead to higher projections for the Pats, but higher ownership and lineup constructions that are heavily favoring them as well. So a lot of 4-2s, 5-1 lineups in the large field GPPs. The ownership might be 1.5 to even 2 times some of their peers on the Jets side of things. And we got to know that ahead of time, because if you plan on playing in the large field contest with 50 to 100,000 plus entries, and you're trying to take down first place against all those people, if you want to get different and you want to make sure you're not going to duplicate yourself 50 to 100 plus times, you're going to have to consider some more creative scripts, whether that would be leaving $2,000 to even $3,000 on the table within any of those Pats heavy builds, or going to a 3-3 or even a 4-2 Jets lineup would be a way to differentiate yourself in those lineups. But with the 12.5 point spread, and especially because I agree with that sort of sentiment, I think the Pats are going to win this game pretty handedly. I'm personally going to be playing in more single entries and cash builds where I don't have to worry about the duplication as much, especially from the cash format. I'm not a huge cash guy, so it's going to be a lot of single entries for me on Thursday Night Football, or if I'm duplicating with 4, maybe 5 entries in a couple thousand entry contest, it's really not the end of the world. I'd rather do that than play in the super top heavy GPPs, where that kind of thing will completely tank your long-term ROI. So before you even start reserving entries, I think you should have an idea of how you expect this game to play. And if you've got the stomach to play anything 4-2 Jets, a 5-1 would be overthinking it. I wouldn't go that far with your lineup construction, but anything 4-2 based, then the large field GPPs are perfect for you. But let's start with Drake May at $12,000 at the top. He's extremely expensive compared to where he's been the rest of the year, but on this slate, he's a borderline lock, because when you take a look at the rest of the board and their points per dollar efficiency, nobody is even close to 1.7x towards the top. In fact, the next closest would be a Justin Fields down at $9,400, who's a 1.6x points per dollar projection himself, and that has a lot to do with the rushing upside he brings to the table. In terms of all the other spend ups that we have up here, Drake May is by far the best that we have. So at the flex position, I've got him about 55% owned, over 30% at the captain, which is something that we have not seen very often this year, but it's a combination of the lack of value at the top end of the board, also the fact that it is such a one-sided game that people are going to be using Drake May in almost every single build. And because I agree with the spread, I think they're going to be scoring 21 to 28 points as a team. I'm going to be prioritizing him in almost every single lineup that I'm building. So he's expensive. I think you fit him in where you can. There is going to be some lower tier value, it looks, especially on the Jets side of things, that you can use to offset that kind of price tag. And at the captain spot, I think he's usable, but $18,000 is really hard to stomach, especially if you're in the large field GPPs. It feels like one of these skill position guys is going to score a touchdown, maybe get you the 70 to 100 yards that you need to be that optimal captain. But a cash/single entries where you don't have to have the absolute nuts, I think Drake May makes a whole lot of sense at that captain spot, because the 30% ownership doesn't mean nearly as much in those sort of formats, and you're getting the best spend up that we have on the slate. So sometimes it's best not to overthink it. Next up, we got Travion Henderson at $10,600. If Ramondre Stevenson ends up not playing, he could be a pretty good value at that sort of price tag. But as is, I've got Ramondre projected in. He has been questionable, has been limited in some of the practices so far this week. If he plays, you can see he's only a 1.1x projection on a Henderson, 1.5x on Ramondre, because he's got a lot more of a reasonable price tag. But if Ramondre gets rolled out, that's going to push Henderson to a 2x points per dollar projection, and that would actually make him an even better play than Drake May at 12 grand. It would also skyrocket with the ownership. So he's somebody that's going to have a very volatile projection as we get closer to Thursday. Could go way up, could stay about the same as what we have right here. But assuming that both are active, that's what I'm going to assume as of right now, just because we don't have that news quite yet. If they both play, I'd rather have Ramondre. Obviously, if Ramondre's out, then you'd rather have a Travion Henderson Henderson. So I think it's all really going to depend on that kind of news. But because he's super expensive, and if they both end up being active, there is going to be leverage to be had on Henderson. So even in a little bit of a timeshare, a platoon role between those two running backs, if he were to go for a 50-yard touchdown, he saw one of those long touchdown runs towards the end of their last game, he could still pay off that sort of a price tag. So I don't think you want to completely remove him from contention if Ramondre ends up playing, but I want to know the news and I want to know the ownership ahead of time before I make that kind of decision myself. Next up, we got a Breece Hall at $10,200. He's got a 1.4x points per dollar projection, which is a bit better than Henderson, especially if he's in that timeshare role, but as 12.5 point underdogs, it's really hard to get behind a spend up running back, especially one like Breece Hall that doesn't have a whole lot of red zone upside. He's not a big bruising back that's going to get all the touches when they get down to the red zone. If Justin Fields is the quarterback, we'll talk about that here in a second. I guess it's not a 100% chance that he's going to be the quarterback. Could be Tyrod Taylor for Thursday Night Football, but Breece Hall, especially if Justin Fields is at quarterback, he can still get there with some of the receiving upside, but you don't like him as 12.5 point underdog. So I'm personally going to be using him under the field in my exposure. I'm not going to be completely fading him in my large field GPPs, especially as a 150 max player. It'd be kind of silly to fade one of these top 4 to top 5 priced players, but to go to a half field stance, let's say he's 40 to 50% owned, maybe using him in only 20 to 25% is probably where I'm going to end up by the time we get to Thursday. Next up, we got a Stephon Diggs at $9,800, also expensive, and this is why so many people are prioritizing Drake May at the top, and if Ramondre's out, so many will be prioritizing Henderson for that Patriots side of things, is because the other skill position players, even on the Pats side, are probably at least $1,000 too expensive. So Stephon Diggs is about 38% at flex, about 10% at that captain spot. He could still easily get there to in the large field GPPs. It's just that in cash/single entries, he doesn't have to be somebody that you're prioritizing in all your builds. In large field GPPs, he scores a touchdown, he maybe gets you 100 plus receiving yards. That would be his way to the optimal captain, and a little bit less than that, maybe a touchdown and like 50 yards would be enough to get him there to the optimal flex position. He has equity to get to that sort of number, but is he going to do that 50% of the time? Probably not. So that's why I kind of agree with Drake May being that super chalk, pretty much a lock in almost every single lineup, because a lot of these other guys below him, like a Breece Hall on the underdogs, a Stephon Diggs that's way overpriced, aren't guys that I'm running to get my exposure to. I'll definitely have them in lineups. Diggs, I'm going to have at least the field on. Probably 1.5x leverage is going to be the mark that I'm shooting for on Thursday, but not a full 2x leverage like I'm looking to get on guys that are a little bit further down the board. Let's go to Justin Fields next. So he's $9,400, not 100% going to be the starter for Thursday. We're going to have to wait until we get closer to lock, until we get an announcement on whether it's him or Tyrod. I would prefer it to be Justin Fields just because of the rushing upside that he brings to the table. I don't think the spread's going to move at all between those two quarterbacks. They're pretty much the same talent level, at least if you're asking me as an evaluator. The thing is, from fantasy, and from the fantasy perspective, Fields has a whole lot more upside because of that aspect. And it's not like Tyrod's a statue himself. I mean, he'll run at times, but Justin Fields has legit red zone upside to score a touchdown, let alone the kind of passing upside that he brings on top of that. And I know he's gotten a lot of crap this year for not being the best passing quarterback. I got to see it firsthand last year when he started for the Steelers, but he's still serviceable on the ground, and he throws enough, and he's effective enough when he throws the ball, at least when he was on the Steelers, to post some 20-plus point games. So I'm going to be using him quite a bit. In fact, he's the one player on the Jets that I'll be close, or at least trying to get close to 2x leverage. You can't quite do that because he has 58% between the flex and the captain spot. I'm not quite sure I'm going to go to him at captain. I don't know if I like him that much, but I might be using him in like 80% of my lineups at the flex position, because I think even as one or even two of the players that you're using as a buyback to a Pats build, whether it's a 4-2 or a 5-1 lineup, you could use Justin Fields naked even as that one player in a 5-1 because of that rushing upside, his ability to score a touchdown when they get within the 5-yard line, and of course the lack of solid receiving options that you have on New York. There are so many receivers that are going to be mixing in, a lot of young guys that really are unproven. You might be seeing like 60 to 70% of snaps for like 4, even 5 wide receivers for the Jets, and it's going to be an extremely spread out kind of workload. So that's why I'm okay using Justin Fields even as just a one player from the Jets side, because he's a bit of a unique quarterback. He's not like a Joe Flacco. He's not like one of the more passing first players that we have in the NFL that are always going to bring pass catching options along with him. Kayshon Boutte is also questionable for Thursday. So same thing with Ramondre. He's also questionable at $7,600, but both of them have very reasonable price tags. Jags. Abudi, his projection is going to go up to a little bit over 10 points if he ends up being active. Ramondre at a 1.5x points per dollar mark far outshides some of these other players around them. And normally 1.5x points per dollar value isn't that good on a showdown slate like this, but when we're comparing them to a Patriots at 1.2x, Pop Douglas at 0.9x, a Mac Hollins who's only 1.3x points per dollar projection, we'll squeeze out that value where we can. So Ramondre, if he plays, is going to be a priority in a lot of my builds. He was the running back one before the injury went down. I know Henderson has looked extremely solid over the last couple weeks, very impressive, especially with that long run the last time that he touched the ball. But Ramondre is the one that has the confidence of the offense. Even with some of the fumbling issues this year, he has been that solidified running back one. And I would be pretty shocked if it went the other way around, if Henderson was getting all the touches and both of them were active. And that's why I think he's the running back that you want for the Pats, because he's still going to have some ownership. It's the same thing with Henderson. Henderson's about 29% at flex. I've got Ramondre at about 30% at that flex spot. If they're going to have even ownership, but he's going to be that much cheaper, then I know who I'll be using in my lineups. The Pats defense could be another way to get some differentiation into your builds. The thing I like about them is that they are overpriced, and you may say, why is that a good thing, Luke? The fact that somebody's an extra $15 to even $2,000, it's because of the ownership angle. And if you're going to play the Pats defense, you're playing an onslaught of 4-2 or 5-1, which will be the chalkiest kind of build that we have for Thursday. You want to correlate it towards a specific outcome. And if it's going to be the running backs for New England getting there, perhaps a Ramondre at captain, a Henderson at captain, or even using both of those running backs together again and a Patriots defense, that sort of combination is going to be a lot lower owned than going to some of the top value plays that we have on the slate. Like, for example, a Hunter Henry and Andy Boreaga, I can't say his last name, Borealis. I'm not even going to try anymore, but a Mason Taylor at 1.8x points per dollar value, and Adonai Mitchell at 1.9x points per dollar value. There are a lot of really obvious value plays that we haven't gone to quite yet. If you use a Patriots defense that's too expensive but correlates directly with the kind of outcome that you're going for, sure, you're not getting those flashy plays that might get you 15 to 20 points. Patriots defense is closer to that 10 to 12 point mark, but if it's a low scoring game, the Patriots control the ball, they scored 2 to 3 touchdowns that we have in this affair, Patriots defense could easily be that optimal lineup, let alone if, whether it's a Tyrod Taylor or Justin Fields that's playing quarterback, one of them makes a boneheaded throw and throws a pick six or something like that. So I love this Patriots defense, especially because I've got them at sub 20% ownership right now, and the only reason for that is their 1.2x points per dollar value. So I would not use them in your single entries or cash lineups. They are a large field GPP only sort of option, but they give you a lot of leverage and they really connect well with some of the lower owned or more leveraged pieces that you can find on the Patriots. Next up, we have Demario Douglas. He's got a 0.9x points per dollar value. He's also extremely low owned, so if you're looking to play somebody on New England and get a little bit of leverage, he could be that player for you. The unfortunate aspect, though, is that he's got less than a 1x points per dollar value, so you can't really rely on him as a high floor play. Mac Hollins is the same kind of option, but he projects a little bit better. He's been more involved down the field for the Patriots rather than Douglas, who's been more of that PPR threat. So I would say if you're in a cash single entry lineup, I might prefer Douglas over Hollins just because his floor is going to be higher than Hollins's is, but Hollins has more red zone touchdown upside. He's also got more 30 to 40 yard reception upside because he's that speedy guy. He's got a really big frame as well. Drake May, people have said, has maybe the best deep ball in all of the NFL, and that is only a couple years into his career. Mac Hollins is somebody that's been a direct beneficiary of that. So $5,800, I would say he's more of a GPP play than anything. Douglas, more of the cash single entry guy, whereas Hollins is where you're looking for the upside. If you're looking for the cash down low, it's going to be these next two players. And I kind of pointed that out just a second ago, but Henry and Andy B for the Patriots. Again, we're not going to try that last name. 1.7x and 1.8x points per dollar respectively. So that's because they're on the higher implied team total. Hunter Henry is probably at least $1,000 too cheap here, maybe even $2,000 too cheap compared to where some of the other wide receivers are coming in. And then when you're 12.5 point favorites and you're on the kicking side of things, I like playing the favorite kicker because not only do they have that higher implied team total, which in turn obviously raises the projection of their kicker, but when you're down by a couple touchdowns, you don't kick field goals. So Nick Folk, for example, on the other side of the game, I worry that in the second half, he's even going to have a field goal attempt if they're playing from a couple touchdowns behind, like you'd see with the spread. Whereas an Andy B over here, if they're playing from ahead and they're playing from 2 touchdowns ahead and they want to make it a 3 touchdown lead, there's no hesitation whatsoever for them to go out there and kick that sort of thing. So it's not just the higher projection, but also the game environment that I think really favors the kickers that are on the favorite side. Next up, we got an Isaiah Davis at $4,200. He's been running back 2 for the Jets over the last couple games, and because they've won a couple games, they've actually played from ahead and he's gotten some snaps. However, as 12.5-point underdogs against the Patriots, especially because he's $4,200, it's not like he's cheap. That's probably way too expensive for what a running back 2 should be. He's not that usable in my opinion because he's got to have the kind of game environment where they're playing from ahead for him to get the usage that you're hoping for to pay off this kind of price tag, and I just personally don't see it for Thursday Night Football. But if you're somebody that's playing some Jets lineups, has a little bit more hope in that they're going to keep it competitive, then perhaps Davis can be a part of your builds that way, because I do have him at just 2% ownership. That is so ridiculously low. In fact, it's probably going to go up a little bit as we get closer to lock, but because he's so overpriced at 1.2x, I've only got him at 2% ownership in the large field GPPs. Next up, we got a Mason Taylor at $4,000. He's at 1.8x points per dollar value, so just like some of the other value plays, I'm expecting him to get quite a bit of steam in the large field contest. He's been a favorite target of Justin Fields and Tyrod Taylor in 2025, so regardless of who's playing quarterback, I'm expecting him to get at least maybe 3, 4, 5 targets during the game, and as 12.5-point underdogs, you'd expect them to be passing quite a bit. So they have some other tight ends on the team, like a Ruckert, who we'll talk about later, who's a little bit more of a blocker. Mason Taylor's that true receiving tight end that they have on the Jets that is going to see extra usage if they're playing from behind. So 7.3 raw point projection, not somebody I'd be using at captain or anything, really anyone on the Jets. I'm not sure I'm going to have any captains from that side of things. Maybe a Justin Fields, especially if he's the quarterback with that rushing upside. He'd be the one guy to consider for that. But the flex to help you save some salary, especially in contests like cash and single entry, where you don't need all that kind of differentiation, Mason Taylor makes a whole lot of sense. And to go back to the Hunter Henry and the Andy B here, I did mention the chalk, and that is something as a bit of a negative on these sort of players. But if you're in the right sort of contest, like I said, I'm playing in tonight, right? The cashless single entry builds, you don't have to worry about that nearly as much. So the PSA with the ownership is more catered towards anyone that's playing in large field GPPs and where you're actively trying to make sure you're not duplicating yourself 1,000 different times. Next up, we got a Terrell Jennings. He was the running back 2 for the Pats when Ramondre Stevenson was out, but he's questionable himself, and Ramondre might end up returning this week. So if Ramondre's back, then remove Terrell from consideration. He's way too expensive at $3,600. And obviously, if he's out with the questionable tag himself, then you won't want to be using him in lineups. But if Ramondre is out and Jennings ends up being active, then it's somebody that could be a value to use at $3,600. Next up, we got a Tyler Johnson. He played quite a bit for the Jets last week. He was their third most snapped wide receiver that you had in that game. So with the kind of experience that he has, he's very familiar with the offense that they run on the Jets. At $3,400, he's a value that you could use on their team. Unfortunately, though, he doesn't have a lot of flash to him. He's not really like a big framed, red zone sort of wide receiver that's going to catch a whole lot of touchdowns. So he's not the sexiest play at 1.5x points per dollar value. Speaking of not a sexy play, you've got the Jets at $3,200. The only reason that they're even somewhat usable is because they're cheap at $3,200. But even at 1.7x points per dollar value, you'd have to think that we're going to have some guys down here, whether it's somebody scoring a touchdown, a Mitchell getting you a big play, maybe even Tyler Johnson getting into the end zone himself, it's going to outscore that Jets defense. So I think if you're playing the 4-2 Jets build, then maybe you do have some Jets defense / special teams in there. But for somebody like myself, that's a little bit too much of a stretch for me to go with on my exposure. There's leverage to be had on a play like that, but it doesn't always mean that it's a smart strategy to go out there and use them. There are some plays that are low owned for a reason. Like we were seeing with an Isaiah Davis before, like there's a reason why nobody's even plugging them into their builds. Next up, we got an Adonai Mitchell. He's going to be, and I quote, wide receiver 1 for the Jets, but I don't really think there's going to be a wide receiver 1 for the Jets. He did not play the last time out, but the coaches have been singing the praises of Mitchell all week, like he's going to be that breakout star for them. I've only got him at 5.6 points though, so I'm not quite full in on a Mitchell quite yet. We'll see what happens over the next day or so in some of the beat reporter news that ends up coming out. But even at only 5.6 points, which is a very modest projection for, again, a wide receiver 1, we'll put in quotes, 1.9x points per dollar projection is pretty solid at this sort of a price tag. So I've got him getting some ownership, but not quite as much as some of the other guys that were 25 to 30%, that are closer to the 1.8x to 2x mark ahead of them. So if you're looking for a good value play that's not getting the same kind of steam, it has a lot to do with because he's on the Jets. I mean, it was the same thing with Mason Taylor, I guess. So we can't really say that with all of these other value plays, but Patriots player, right? A lot of these other guys down here that are values are going to be guys on the Patriots which is why he's only at about 13.6% at flex. Next up, we got an Allen Lazard. He did not play last week, so he's somebody that might be a healthy scratch for Thursday. I'd have to think, though, with Garrett Wilson out and they don't really have any veteran wide receivers, that either he's going to be active or they're going to have a Josh Reynolds active who's only $200. So we'll mention that as well. Reynolds was also not active last week, so I don't know what it was with these two. Maybe it was injuries. They were a little bit more banged up than the team was leading us on to believe. But this week, I'd have to imagine at least one or even both of them is going to be active, because with all these other scrub wide receivers that have hardly even played snaps for the Jets at this point, there has to be some sort of stability on the offense. Some sort of wide receiver that could turn around and say, hey, this is the play. If the guy around him doesn't know the ball, I can tell you from experience that I was sometimes that guy in offense. I mostly played defense when I was playing football growing up, and I needed that guy in offense sometimes to tell me what the hell I was doing. Now, these are professionals. They should be obviously a little bit more prepared than I was when I was playing Pee Wee football, but it's that same kind of idea. So don't be surprised if a Lazard or a Reynolds or even both of them end up being active. But we're going to have to see that before we make them plays, because last week they weren't even in the picture. Kyle Williams is $2,000. Before last week's game, Vrabel ended up saying that he wanted to get him and Henderson the ball more. The Henderson one made a whole lot of sense as he was the starter with Ramondre out, but the Kyle Williams one caught a lot of people off guard, including myself. In fact, I didn't have him in my player pool. I saw that news and ended up making him a late ad on Sunday. And boy, was I glad that he did it, because he went off for like a 70-yard touchdown or something like that. And considering that he was nearly the minimum price for large field GPPs, that was more than enough to help him get to the optimal lineup. So at $2,000, I think he's usable. He's more of that home run threat because he hasn't gotten a whole lot of targets in 2025. But at least if the coach speak is correct that we heard from some of those coaches, they're very high on his prospects going forward, and they want him to get the ball a little bit more. So keep an eye on him for the New England side. And unlike the Jets side, where we have scrub-ass Justin Fields throwing on the ball, Bustin' Fields, as we called him on the Steelers. We're ruthless when he didn't end up playing that well last year. You have a legit guy in Drake May throwing the ball. And if it's a downfield target like Kyle Williams, that's a home run waiting to happen. I love Drake May throwing the ball. Again, maybe the best downfield thrower that we have in the NFL. Next up, we got Arian Smith. He was actually the number one snapped wide receiver for the Jets last week, which most of you probably didn't know. I didn't know until I did the full deep dive on Arian. But at $1,600, he's squarely in play in large field GPPs, especially even with some of the other guys like Adonai Mitchell that they're activating, who might end up being the number one snapped wide receiver this week. You'd have to think that Smith is going to be number 2 or number 3 in that category. So at 2.1x points per dollar value, he's somebody on the Jets that I'll certainly be using. And Austin Hooper's questionable, and I actually have him projected as out right now. But another player on the Patriots that I would be using his value towards the bottom, as he has the better quarterback throwing in the ball, and he's only $1,400. And Austin Hooper, when he's been active this year, has been playing 25-30% of the snaps. He's seen targets on almost every single game as well. So at that kind of price tag and on the team that should be more efficient, he is certainly going to be in consideration for me. And Isaiah Williams, he played 43% of the snaps for the Jets last week, which I believe was like the 4th most snapped wide receiver that they had on that team. So somebody that is going to be playing, you'd think, unless they end up making him a healthy scratch and then making a Reynolds or a Lazard active. That's the fluid situation that I guess we don't know as of right now. But Isaiah Williams was the player that they had active the last time out. John Mechie was also active, but he didn't play very much in the last game. He's $1,000, and I'd have to think if a Reynolds or a Lazard ends up being activated, that he's probably the one that ends up sitting out. So that's just my take as of right now and what I think happens. Jeremy Ruckert is tight end 2 for the Jets. He plays for them quite often. He's more of a blocking threat, but he does get targets almost every other game. So he's somebody at $600 that is usable, especially if he can get into the end zone. Jack Westover, he's the 3rd tight end that you have for New England. He would be in play if Austin Hooper is out, but if Hooper is going to be active, Westover is probably only playing 5 to 10% of snaps, so not likely somebody that you're using outside of large field GPPs. Josh Reynolds, we've already talked about a few times. The thing to note there is that he's only $200. So if he's even active and gets you 1 to 2 catches, that might be enough to pay off that kind of price tag and help you use a Drake May at captain, who's a whole $18,000. So it's not just who you're getting down here, it's what it opens up elsewhere. And the Drake May captain exposure does make a few of these punts a rather intriguing option. And then you've got the fullback for the Jets, Andrew Beck at the bottom. I know he's listed as a running back, but he does play the fullback position. Only going to get there if he ends up falling into the end zone. So it's more so the guys like Reynolds, if they're active, that I'm looking to play, Jeremy Ruckert, and Austin Hooper, if he ends up being active, to try and get some of that value and fit in a Drake May at captain. And now on the prop and the betting side of things, where I've already entered this 2-leg slip on Underdog that you might want to consider tailing for yourself. And we're actually going to start with the Justin Fields prop first, which is the over on 0.5 passing touchdowns, which for the year, I've done some research on what his lines have been. He's been minus 200 to minus 250 to go over this line all year. And while it's not 100% certain that he'll be the starting quarterback for the Jets on Thursday, I guess that's the risk with taking this sort of prop, is that if he ends up not being the starting quarterback and then comes in on a third down, could end up going under that sort of projection in that scenario. But assuming that he's the starting quarterback, he was the last time out, this is a massive value at 0.5 passing touchdowns. In fact, even if he's not the starting quarterback, there's a low percentage chance that he even comes in and has that running back usage. If you take a look at his game logs this year, that has not happened in 2025, which has me thinking that this is just value that we can't pass up. If it's going to be minus 200 to minus 250 with refund equity in our back pocket in most cases, then I'll enter it before we have that confirmation. So he's at 0.5 passing touchdowns. He's gone over this in 5 of his 8 starts. So not quite an elite tier hit rate of 6 out of 8, 75% plus that we look for on a lot of these plays, but good enough, especially with the kind of juice that it's likely to have. So I'll play that on Underdog. I believe they also have that on Prize Picks at that number, but we're playing it here on Underdog because of the second prop that we have here, and the combination not only being 1.05x because of the multiplier, but also boosted up because of some of the anti-correlation rules. So it's 3.3x on this combo, and it's an over on Drake May rushing attempts. On the sportsbooks, he's at 5.5, and on Draftkings, he's actually minus 122 towards the over, and he's gone over this in 7 of his 10 starts so far. So that's an elite tier hit rate at 70% right there, and I actually think that he's going to be at 5.5 on almost all the major books when they post their lines, in minus 130 plus towards the over because of that elite tier hit rate, also because of the kneel down rate that he's going to have as well. As the 12.5 point favorites, you'd have to think that towards the end of the game, at least if May is still in the game, I guess that's the one risk that you run with this kneel down equity. But assuming that it's within a couple touchdowns and he's the one that's kneeling it down at the end of the game, that's 1, 2, even 3 kneel downs right there, 3 rushing attempts on top of the extra usage that he has. And when you take a look at Drake May's projections, he's got a 23.5 yard rush line. On Pinnacle, he's like minus 130 towards the over at that. There are books that have him at 24, 25.5 rushing yards. If he's going to give you that much rushing usage, that's 3, 4, maybe even 5 rushing attempts right there, plus the kneel down equity on top of that. So elite tier hit rate on this sort of prop, a little bit of a boosted payout as well on some quote-unquote anti-correlation that I don't agree with. If Drake May is going to go over the 5.5 attempts, that's probably going to have a lot to do with that kneel down equity in the game being in their favor, but also being close enough to where Drake May is not being taken off the field, right? Because if they're up by 5 touchdowns, then Drake May is probably not kneeling down at the very end of the game. It's probably their backup. I think Josh Dobbs that they have at quarterback that they're using instead. Justin Fields on the other side, though, if we know that it's not going to be like a 5 touchdown lead, then maybe it's because Justin Fields can throw us a touchdown, right? He's done it in 5 of the 8 games. If they're playing from behind, they're probably going to be more passing heavy than rushing heavy in that kind of scenario. I actually think that even though they're giving us a boosted payout with the quote-unquote anti-correlation, that it's going in the other direction, that these two are actually heavily correlated in our favor. So I'll take those two for that 3.3x payout. For the rest of the exposure that I'm playing for Thursday Night Football, you guys can find that on my Patreon page. Alrighty, guys, that's all I've got for the Thursday Night Football preview. Best of luck with everything that you're going with, whether it's in the large hold GPPs. I hope to see a lot of your names towards the top end of this contest, or with any prop bets that you're entering as well. It's cash out, try and add to the bankroll from that perspective. Let's get it for Thursday. But that's all, guys. I appreciate your support in the channel. Smash that like button if you guys haven't already. Also subscribe to the channel so you guys don't miss any of the content to come. We're gonna have a main slate preview dropping on in a few days for the games on Sunday. Also for Monday Night Football, we'll have a showdown breakdown just like what we had right here. So if you guys don't want to miss any of that content when it drops, make sure you subscribe so you get notified when all of that goes live. But other than that, best of luck. Thank you guys for the support in the channel as per usual. And also comment down below who you've got as the top scorer for the Thursday Night Football slate for a chance to earn a free month in my Patreon. And on there is where I've got all the prop bets, as I mentioned, but also that spreadsheet for DFS that you saw before, completely uncensored with my entire player pool on it. I've got my captain exposure, the script notes, how I'm using all the players that I'm going with, also complete player notes for every single player that's on the slate, telling you whether they played last week or not, the kind of snaps that can be expected, whether they're better plays for cash / single entries. You know, we talk about a lot of that here on the video together, but I'm not able to fully expand on it like I am over there on the spreadsheet. All of that by just guessing the correct top scorer for Thursday. But if you want to join now and get access to all of that, I could not blame you. Link in the description of the video to go out there and join my Patreon page. NFL DFS tier is how you get access to the spreadsheets. NFL prop tier is how you get the Underdog and Prize Pick stuff. But that's all, guys. I appreciate you, and I'll see you guys a little bit later on this week for the main slate preview.